It was the year 1982 in the United Kingdom. Two brothers, Tim and Chris Stamper, would form a company named Ashby Computers and Graphics Limited, also known by its simpler name, Ultimate Play the Game. Ultimate Play the Game wanted to make video games, but making games was the easy part. What they really wanted was to make some of the best games we've ever seen. These two brothers had big ambition, but the future they had in store would surpass any expectations they once had. This is the history of Rare. Before the brothers formed Ultimate Play the Game, it was only really Chris who wanted to get into the field of electronics. He had a long interest for them ever since he was a kid. He studied how electronics worked and was super talented at making stuff. He even built a oscilloscope while he was still young. Making this sort of stuff was Chris's dream, so when he went into college, he would attend the Loughborough University of Technology, with the intent of getting degrees in electronics and physics. But while in college, he found out that he wanted to do something else even more: programming. In college, Chris taught himself how to code by creating his own traffic signaling software, and learning coding more and more made Chris want to become a full-time programmer. So in 1981, he would leave the university to pursue his new dream of computer programming. He started his career working on arcade cabinets for companies like Konami, doing stuff like bug fixing or just altering the cabinets itself. When Chris had this job with arcade cabinets, he would tell his brother Tim about it, and he told Tim that he should join him. And after some persuasion, Tim actually would join him. They would both work together helping these companies, having fun programming. But then, after a while, the brothers got tired of other people's bullshit. They believed they were skilled enough to make their own company. They even claimed to be the most experienced arcade video game design team in Britain. So, Ultimate Play the Game was born. The team started out as only a few people: the Stamper brothers, the brothers' friend, John Lathbury, Tim Stamper's girlfriend, Carol, who would later end up getting married to Tim, and some family that would help in the background. The team was formed, and the Stamper brothers instantly got to work. The brothers wanted to move away from arcade games and try something new, so they started by developing a game for the ZX Spectrum. This game would be Jetpack, the first title made by Ultimate Play the Game. In this game, you play as this astronaut dude named Jetman. Jetman wants to build a rocket ship to explore different planets, but while he's trying to build it, aliens try to kick the dog shit out of him. And that's the game. You manage building your rocket ship while fending off aliens. A really simple and humble start for Ultimate. But with Jetpack, Ultimate hit it big. Jetpack was at one point the #1 most sold game for the ZX Spectrum. And if that wasn't enough, Jetpack would even get the prestigious Game of the Year award at the Golden Joystick Awards in 1983. The first thing these brothers put on the market was a hit. They already established to everyone that they knew what the hell they were doing. In this era, the brothers just kept making games, and everyone loved them. Constant success after success. Even games like Saberwolf that were made in this time would be referenced years later in games such as Killer Instinct. This was one hell of a time for Tim and Chris Stamper. Everything was perfect, but then something weird happened. In 1985, the Stamper brothers would announce that they sold their company Ultimate Play the Game to a British game publisher known as US Gold. So now, US Gold is in charge, and they decided to make more games under the Ultimate name. And they were ass. Everyone thought these new games were just super disappointing and didn't live up to the previous titles. Because of this, sales declined for the Ultimate company, to the point where US Gold stopped releasing games entirely under Ultimate's name in 1987. Ultimate Play the Game was officially dead. But then, is that where this story ends? How would the Stamper brothers even come back from something like this? Well, there may be something I neglected to tell you. A little bit before Ultimate was sold to US Gold, another company name was being listed on the credits of Ultimate's titles that they were releasing. That company name was Rare Designs on the Future, also known as Rare Limited. The Stamper brothers actually made the Rare company before they sold Ultimate. The company was only made to develop more games for Ultimate. It was never actually meant to replace it. But after Ultimate got screwed by US Gold, the Stampers would evolve Rare into something that went beyond even Ultimate's success. You see, one thing that held Ultimate back was this thing, the ZX Spectrum. This console was only really mainstream in the United Kingdom. No one else used this thing. So even though Ultimate's games were loved by everyone, they could never capitalize on an out-of-country market if the market out of country doesn't use the system you sell your damn games on. So with Rare, the Stamper brothers hoped to find a console to fix this problem. The console they would ultimately settle on was the Famicom. This new Nintendo console really impressed Rare. They thought making games for it was the right move, to make their company even bigger than before. But Rare wanted to know more about this console. They planned to reverse engineer the Famicom and investigate the code to learn about it even more. But the creator of the Famicom, Nintendo, said that this was impossible. There's no way anyone could reverse engineer the Famicom, it's never been done before. Rare took that as a challenge, and within a few weeks, they cracked it. And not only that, they were able to make a fully playable tech demo for this system. After their success, the English company would travel all the way to Japan to meet Nintendo for themselves and show them what they've accomplished. Nintendo was stunned and knew these guys had potential. Nintendo gave the team an unlimited budget to make games for the Famicom. This moment would be crucial to Rare's future success and would start Nintendo and Rare's relationship. When Rare would return back home to England, they made an official studio and headquarters for themselves, and they would expand their team. They could even tell that soon, they were going to be doing big things. So when the time came, the Famicom was released outside of Japan as the NES. Rare instantly got to work. The first game they made for the NES was this skiing game called Slalom. It's a game where you ski. Dope. But what's really cool about Slalom is that its music was composed by David Wise, who's the same person who made that fire soundtrack in that one game. Back to what Rare is doing though. After Slalom, Rare worked on several games with different publishers, making over 60 games for the NES. Some notable games they made were RC Pro AM, their first NES game to sell over 1 million copies, and Battletoads, a beat-em-up game that left one hell of a legacy, having multiple sequels, an extremely positive reception, and a crossover with Double Dragon. The series is still pretty relevant today too. This game was definitely one of Rare's biggest titles in their entire history. In the NES era, Rare just kept making games, like so many fucking games, picking up licenses wherever they could and just making games about them. Even if those games they made were ass, Rare just wanted to make more games, even if they weren't going to be hits, since at the end of the day, the games they were making were still making a profit. But this NES era would come to a close eventually. People stopped being excited about the system. It was old news, because there was a new system to care about, the SNES. This is the part of the story where we get into the big boy shit. When the SNES came out, Rare was not ready for the change in systems, so for the first bit of the SNES's life, Rare was just releasing Battletoads sequels to do something. But there's a reason Rare wasn't ready immediately. They finally dropped their ass mentality of making shit but profitable games. They decided they wanted to make banger games now. Rare was preparing to make a huge upgrade to quality. Using their profits from the NES era, they would invest in expensive silicone graphics computers. These expensive computers allowed for Rare to have access to the third dimension. This upgrade in hardware made Rare the most technologically advanced developer in the entire United Kingdom. Rare was not messing around anymore. The first thing Rare did with this new technology was figure out how to implement it into the SNES. We all know the SNES isn't a console that supports three-dimensional models, so how is Rare even going to use their new technology? Well, they used a technique to pre-render 3D models into sprites for the SNES. Basically, they would make a 3D model and fully animate it with their fancy-ass computers, then turn those animations into sprites to use on an SNES. Rare used this technique to wow Nintendo once again. They made a playable demo of some kind of boxing game and showed it to them. Nintendo was so impressed that they bought a 25% stake of the entire Rare company, and that percent over time would gradually increase to a huge 49%. This would officially make Rare a second-party developer for Nintendo systems. And even though a good amount of Rare was owned by Nintendo, Nintendo trusted Rare enough to mostly do stuff themselves. Rare could make their own projects and stuff freely without much greenlight from Nintendo. It was a very nice situation for Rare, and Rare knew it. This is when they would start releasing games under the name Rareware, and they would make a new logo for this momentous occasion. Nintendo was loving Rare so much that they considered them to be one of their key developers, and offered them a list of characters to make a game with their newly discovered pre-rendered graphics. And out of this list, one character would stand out to the Stampers specifically. That character was Donkey Kong. Maybe because of their background in the arcade. But with that, it was settled. Donkey Kong. A team of 20 people at Rare would work on this Donkey Kong game for the next 18 months, going to real-life zoos to study animals and putting their absolute heart and soul into this game. The result being Donkey Kong Country. This game took the world by storm. It was revolutionary. The graphics were unbelievable, the soundtrack, the sound design. Listen to this shit! This game was a masterpiece. It sold over 9 million copies and got 2 separate Game of the Year awards. After Donkey Kong Country, Rare would expand their company from 84 staff members to 250, and even though the team was getting bigger and bigger, the team was still a family. There was a kind of synergy that was hard to replicate with these guys, and I think that's what made their game so good. It's not like every member of Rare was a perfect developer, or even close to perfect, but it was how the team worked together that made them Rare. Whether it was Chris Sutherland with his programming, David Wise with his music, or Kevin Bayliss with his art, they all worked together as a team to make Donkey Kong Country what it was. Rare would also make 2 more Donkey Kong Country games for the SNES, with whole new characters and level designs. Everything was always fresh with this company. So fresh that their next major game was on an arcade cabinet, something the company hasn't messed with since before Ultimate played the game. This game would be called Killer Instinct, a fighting game that took full advantage of the technology Rare had at the time, being a fully 3D modeled game in the year 1994, starring characters that go all the way back to the beginning of Rare's history. This was possible because they built their own cabinets for Killer Instinct instead of having to deal with the SNES's limitations, though the game would later get downgraded and ported onto the SNES. The Killer Instinct series was a massive success, 2 revolutionary games in the same year. Rare was doing things no one else was, and that would continue on even for the next generation of consoles. Rare's best bud Nintendo has a new console coming out, leaving the Super Nintendo behind. We've now upgraded to the Nintendo 64. This time, Rare is ready for the console switch. Rare has split up the company into a bunch of different teams to work on a bunch of different games at once. They don't want this to turn into what happened with the NES though. They've learned. These teams were chosen carefully by Rare to make sure the games they produce will be of incredible quality. The first game Rare would release on the N64 was Blast Corps, a game where you use vehicles to destroy buildings and solve puzzles. This game came to be because of Chris Stamper's idea for a building destruction game, and the game's puzzles itself were inspired by the Donkey Kong arcade game. Blast Corps sold over 1 million copies and got really good reviews, but Rare's high ego found this disappointing, and they strive to produce better games that'll sell more than just a measly 1 million copies. Large projects that were planned to come out soon after Blast Corps were delayed. Rare changed their schedule completely to give their games more time in the oven. But Rare also wanted to have something out, so they started releasing smaller projects first. The first small project to be released was GoldenEye 007. It was a game that was based off of the James Bond film, GoldenEye. This project was being led by Martin Hollis and his team at the time was extremely inexperienced. This wasn't supposed to be a huge release for Rare, at all. When GoldenEye was in development, at first it was going to play similarly to Sega's Virtua Cop, an on-rail shooter game, but the team decided to get way more ambitious with the game and turn it into a free-roaming first-person shooter, and this change really paid off. This small release by this inexperienced team surprised Rare when it sold a whopping 8 million copies worldwide. It became the most sold Rare game on the Nintendo 64 and was praised by many as one of the best games for the entire system. This is what the company strived for, and it made Rare excited to show the world the bigger projects they had in store. The first of those bigger projects to come out was Diddy Kong Racing. Released in the holiday season of 1997, this game was an instant success. It was so fun, so vibrant, so full of Rare. The team that made this game couldn't even stop playing it. They would go into work and have a blast racing each other, any chance they could. They knew they had something big making this game, and they were damn right. This game would do extremely well, selling 4.8 million copies. Diddy Kong Racing would also feature 2 characters that had their own games coming up. A teaser to the fans of what's to come. Banjo-Kazooie, a game where you play as this bear Banjo and his bird friend Kazooie, and have fun exploring and collecting shit. It's awesome. You've definitely heard of this game before. This game is loved by so many people. By the time Banjo-Kazooie came out and people played it, people across the world knew what to expect from Rare. Fun titles with good gameplay and character. With so many amazing titles, Rare made a standard. The team working on Banjo-Kazooie had been working on this project all the way since they were still developing for the Super Nintendo. It took a lot of time for their project to come to fruition, but because they took the time they needed, it turned into a masterpiece. The main thing about the Banjo team is that they were having fun. The people that made this were an actual dream team. Instead of co-workers, they were friends, always trying to have some fun with their projects. A lot of the fun they had was just trying to mention testicles in their games. For example, if you didn't know, when the character Mumbo Jumbo transforms you into different animals in Banjo-Kazooie, he says the phrase, The composer of Banjo-Kazooie, Grant Kirkhope, stated on an episode of Game Grumps that Mumbo's actually saying "ooh me knackers," knackers being British slang for balls.
Yeah, so the thing is, my balls hurt, so I said it wouldn't be funny. Ooh me knackers, like, oh man, it hurts my ooh me knackers, like, ooh me knackers.
Oh, ooh me knack, really? Really? That's why he says that?
That's why it says ooh me knackers.
This is one of the many examples on how much fun the teams behind Rare were having making these games. With the new generation of directors making these upcoming games, they were young and having fun, which translated into the game itself radiating fun. Banjo-Kazooie would sell 3.6 million copies worldwide and be loved for years and years to come. The next two games to release would be Jet Force Gemini and Donkey Kong 64. Jet Force Gemini was an all-new title inspired by 80s arcade games, and other titles like Super Metroid and Super Mario 64. It's a fun little third-person shooter that got pretty good reception, but this title didn't break any records for the company, sadly. Donkey Kong 64, on the other hand, sold insanely well, selling 5.2 million copies worldwide. It was a Donkey Kong game where Donkey Kong could move in the third dimension. It was a platformer where you collect shit, because those were very popular at the time, and this one stars Donkey Kong. This game got amazing reviews for the time and was seen as one of the best games for the N64. But in recent years, this game has been kinda criticized, since you have to give up a fucking kidney to complete this game. There's 3,831 collectibles in Donkey Kong 64. Like, imagine having to go around and backtrack levels for hours to touch 3,831 separate objects. You'd go insane. But this game made tiny, lanky, and chunky, so realistically it's probably my top 5 games all time. Moving on to Rare's next release was Perfect Dark, a new IP made by Rare that was inspired by their success from GoldenEye 007. A very successful game, selling over 2.5 million copies, and the game was very heavily praised. A sequel to Banjo-Kazooie would then come out called Banjo-Tooie, selling as good as the first game did, and was an incredibly loved game. The final game Rare would release onto the N64 was Conker's Bad Fur Day. I mentioned earlier that Diddy Kong Racing had 2 characters that would star in their own games. One of those was Banjo, the other one was Conker. But this game surprised everyone when it was shown to the world, because this cute squirrel from Diddy Kong Racing was saying fuck and getting wasted. This was a game that was inspired by the popular cutesy platform collectathon genre, but instead of being cutesy, it was vile. Nintendo was actually very open to this idea, believe it or not, and gave the Conker team a lot of leeway to do whatever they wanted with this idea, really. This game has a giant piece of feces that would spit bars to you. Conker would have been in development all the way since the first Banjo game was still in development. The Conker and Banjo team acted as rivals throughout their creation, always shitting on each other's games in development. The Conker team hated the Banjo team, playfully of course. They even mounted Banjo's head onto a wall in their game, and Kazooie got dismembered into an umbrella. The director of Conker, Chris Seaver, has been very open about this time in rivalry with the Banjo team, and it's really interesting to see how it really went behind the scenes. When Bad Fur Day released though, it honestly didn't do that well, actually being a commercial failure. But all the reviews called the game incredible, so it really sucked for Rare. The reason for it being a commercial failure was it being too controversial, appearing as family friendly, but you know, not being family friendly. The game also came out in 2001, and the N64 was pretty old at this point, and people were moving on to other consoles. It was sad, but at least people recognized the game for being a good title, even if it didn't sell well when it was released. And that's the N64 era of Rare. It was one hell of a time. I listed so many fucking games, and it was most of the games put out, because Rare put out quality in this time. After the NES, the quality Rare put into the SNES blew Rare into stardom, and the N64 further increased Rare as one of the best developers in gaming at the time. So with Nintendo's next console, the GameCube, everyone expected Rare to do even better than before. As soon as the GameCube came out, Rare instantly put out a title called Star Fox Adventures, another game that used a previously made Nintendo IP. This game wasn't always meant to be a Star Fox game. It was meant to be a game starring Timber the Tiger, a character from Diddy Kong Racing, but it eventually turned into Star Fox Adventures. It was very different than the other games in the Star Fox series. Instead of being in a ship, it focuses on Fox mainly being on the ground with exploration aspects. And those were all the titles Rare made for the GameCube. That was the only one. But why? The GameCube just came out. Well, the reason surprised Rare more than anyone. As Rare were making more and more teams to develop games, costs increased, and Nintendo wasn't giving them any money to help out. So, Rare asked Nintendo if they would just be interested in buying the entire Rare company. But, to the Stampers' surprise, Nintendo said no, they weren't interested at all. But, this was a huge problem for Rare. Without the money, they wouldn't be able to continue making games. So, Rare looked around for potential buyers to buy their company. The two main offers Rare got were from the companies Activision and Microsoft. Activision and Microsoft would fight in a heated bidding war over Rare. They both really wanted to buy the company. Rare was actually interested in Activision's offer, but Microsoft was just offering Rare way more money. So, Rare would accept Microsoft's deal. And on September 24th, 2002, Microsoft would buy Rare for $375 million. Rare was now a first-party developer for Microsoft's Xbox console. The rights for characters such as Banjo and Conker Rare got to keep, but would obviously lose access to Nintendo characters like Donkey Kong and Star Fox. A lot of fans consider the buyout from Microsoft to be the death of Rare. They think that this is the point where it all went downhill. But, did it really? Let's find out. During the transition from the Microsoft buyout, 30 employees of Rare would leave the company entirely. This was already not a good sign, but Rare was optimistic. Microsoft proved to be nice at first, letting Rare still develop games for the Game Boy Advance. Since Microsoft didn't have a handheld system, they saw no problem with Rare continuing to develop for Nintendo handhelds. Games that come out from this were Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge and It's Mr. Pants, a new Rare IP I guess. It's Mr. Pants actually used to be a game called Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers, but it evolved into a game starring this freak. It's just a little puzzle game, but it's weird that this is the protagonist of said puzzle game. He also made cameos in Jet Force Gemini and Banjo-Tooie. But on the Xbox, the first release from Rare was grabbed by the Ghoulies.
Oh, I've already played a little of this game so I could get reacquainted with the controls, so now I'm just ready to slap some bitches in the ass.
It was a new funny action-adventure game set in a haunted mansion. It was specifically made by teams behind Donkey Kong Country and Banjo-Kazooie, and when the game came out, it received really mixed reviews, and was apparently considered Rare's least popular game at the time. They weren't giving up though. They released more games like a Conker's Bad Fur Day remake, and yeah, that game failed too. They next made Cameo, Elements of Power, and Perfect Dark Zero. These titles were both liked and sold about 1 million copies each, but it was considered disappointing for the company. Then an all-new IP with a lot of work put into it, Viva Pinata, a game about gardening and piñatas. This game has been in development for quite a while actually. It even predates the Microsoft buyout. It took a while for this game to come out, but it eventually did on the Xbox 360, and it even got its own fucking 4Kids cartoon. It was seen as an innovative series, but it commercially failed. So when the Nintendo DS came out, Rare was allowed to develop for it just like the Game Boy Advance. The game that they would make is Diddy Kong Racing DS, and this would be the last time Rare would ever make a game with Nintendo characters, ever again. A remake of the N64's Diddy Kong Racing, and it also got pretty mixed reception. You kinda see a trend here. Rare would end off 2007 releasing a remake of the company's very first game, Jetpack, called Jetpack Refueled, a cute little trip down memory lane for the company. But after that, the Stampers were done. They left Rare. A lot of the Rare team that actually worked on those games that we remember Rare for have left at this point. They wanted to move on to bigger and better things. Tim and Chris Stamper would even leave the public eye completely, and we haven't known much of what they've been up to at all since they left Rare in 2007. It really seemed like everything was going wrong for Rare. Nothing was sticking. Even a third game in the beloved Banjo series, Nuts and Bolts, was received pretty poorly by fans. Microsoft could even tell Rare was falling into a hole, so they decided to try to help by getting them to work on Kinect fucking Sports. Scott Henson, a developer who worked on the hardware of the 360 and Kinect, had this to say: Kinect will be the main focus for Rare going forwards, as it's a very rich canvas. This is just the beginning of an experience that will touch millions of people. They made Rare make fake Wii Sports for the fucking Xbox camera. Dude, look at this shit. Rare made 3 Kinect Sports games in the span of 4 years. Why? Who was asking for that much Kinect Sports? Actually, I might be the dumbass on this one, I won't lie. At least in 2013, Rare would have a cool release. That was a new Killer Instinct. This is a cool-ass release from Rare. A sequel to their beloved fighting game series from back in the day, that's fucking awesome. It even features Rash from the Battletoads, an Arbiter from Halo, and General Rom from Gears of War. This was a fun release from Rare. It was received pretty positively too. But the game itself wasn't enough to put Rare back on track. 2015 would be one hell of a year for Rare history. Not only was it the 30-year anniversary of Rare, but they released the Rare Replay, a collection of 30 of the best games from throughout their history, now being available to play on modern consoles. It wasn't a new game, sure, but it was definitely something people wanted to see, and it was definitely welcome in this era of Rare. 2015 had more than just Rare Replay though. The Dream Team from the N64 era, the same ones that worked on the original Banjo-Kazooie series, had just announced a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, under their new indie company they just made, Playtonic Games. The team would choose this name because of their Playtonic love for making video games. And upon hearing this, fans went crazy. They've been wanting a new Banjo for so long, and now the same people who made one of their favorite games of all time are going to be making that dream come true with their new game, Yooka-Laylee. This project was announced through Kickstarter, and Playtonic Games asked fans for help. They wanted to raise some money to make the project possible. The team would get $1 million within 24 hours of announcing the Kickstarter. People were stoked to relive the joy they had back on the N64 with Banjo. This was very exciting for Playtonic. These ex-Rare employees have actually been planning to do this all the way since back in 2012. But some of the people they wanted on the team were busy at the time, so it didn't come to fruition. But it's finally a reality. Playtonic Games would start developing Yooka-Laylee, and 2 years later, in 2017, they released Yooka-Laylee to mixed reception. Fans of Rare were kinda split on this release. Some fans thought the game was radiating the 90s Rare personality they wanted, while others were pretty disappointed and didn't have much fun with the title. After this, some fans thought they would never get to truly experience another game as special as the one in the 90s. It really split the entire Rare community. Some fans were starting to lose hope. But a couple years later, Playtonic would return with a sequel to Yooka-Laylee, named Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. This game was actually received pretty well, but instead of being a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie like its predecessor, it was heavily inspired by Donkey Kong Country, moving from a 3D plane to a 2D one. People were really satisfied with the Impossible Lair, and hopefully in the future we get to see more great things from Playtonic. But in 2017 we would also see the return of the founders of Rare. Kinda, not really. The Stampers came back into the gaming scene after being gone from the public for an entire decade. The brothers announced how they invested in Fortune Fish, a mobile gaming studio that was created by Tim Stamper's own son. Fortune Fish released a really neat rhythm platform game called Croco Bongo, another game with heavy inspiration from Donkey Kong Country. From father to son, game development is in the Stamper blood. Fortune Fish seems to strive on their quality and take pride in it. So maybe one day, the next generation of Stampers can create games that will shake the world just as Rare did in the 90s. But back to Rare itself. Besides the ex-employees, what are the current employees even doing? Well, they finally got out of Kinect Sports hell, and came out with a game known as Sea of Thieves, a brand new open world game where you sail the seas with your friends as pirates. This was a project Rare put actual passion into. Almost all of Rare's 200 staff members worked on this game, to try to come back into the gaming scene and impress a new generation of fans. When Sea of Thieves was revealed, players around the world were excited, not just Rare fans. This game looked like an incredible adventure waiting to be had. It was one of the biggest titles coming to the Xbox One, period. Rare was on the big stage again, and when it was released, it got mixed reviews. The game was heavily praised for its ship combat, multiplayer, and overall visuals, but it lacked in content, which really hurt the game. Over time, the game would get content updates that would dramatically improve the game, even having a crossover with Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean. This would boost the reputation of Sea of Thieves immensely, but the problem is, Rare didn't have all the content that made the game incredible at launch, which is a mistake Rare definitely needs to learn from. Even back on the N64, Rare was willing to delay games to make the product come out better. Regardless of the mixed reception though, the game was a commercial success. Sea of Thieves was Microsoft's most successful new IP on the Xbox One by far. Since release, Sea of Thieves has attracted a whopping 30 million players as of June 2022, which is incredible. With this pirate game, Rare really showed that they can still make quality titles. They just need the time. Microsoft was being more and more lenient with the company too, allowing for the fan-favorite Banjo to join the new Smash Bros. Game in 2019 as DLC. This drop even came with a remix of the iconic Banjo location, Spiral Mountain, arranged by Grant Kirkhope himself. Microsoft would even allow Rare to add some classic Rare games to the Nintendo Switch Online service. Rare was actually making a comeback. To keep up with the excitement of Banjo and Smash, they released their next title in 2020, developed by Dlala Studios with only a little assistance from Rare itself, the 2020 reboot of the Battletoads. This is the first time the Battletoads have had a game since 1994, with a hand-drawn art style. This seemed like another fun release for Rare, but the reception was mixed again, man. This company cannot win. To be fair, Rare didn't develop it much at all really, it was Dlala Studios, but still. Battletoads is a classic Rare IP, they should have taken better care of it, or supervised the project more. People criticized how repetitive and limited the game felt, and others just thought the game's writing was painfully unfunny. Yet another loss for Rare, and it sucks. I know I've been kinda hard on them here and there, but it's because I want to see the company do well. I'm not gonna lie to you and say these new games they were making were being loved by everyone, because they weren't. Battletoads was Rare's last title to ever be released as of the time making this video, so that was Rare's history from conception to 2023. Rare is now working on an upcoming title named Everwild, which looks visually stunning, and hopefully they take their time making this game something truly special when it releases. Rare is a team that's been through a lot over the course of everything really, and you know what I mean by now. A gaming company that started with two brothers in a dream, to a gaming company that was loved across the entire world, to now, a gaming company that's kind of been forgotten by a new generation of players. Rare is not the same company from the 90s. Everyone who was working with the company then no longer works there now, but I still want to root for them. Rare is a company I personally love. So many great games and such an interesting group of people. Even if those people are no longer part of the modern Rare, I hope the modern Rare still does well in the future. Tim and Chris Stamper worked their asses off to make Rare what it's known as today, and I hope the new generation of employees can pull it together and make Rare special again, with amazing games like Everwild and any other future projects they work on. I truly do believe that Rare can come back.